As a landscape photographer, you might not care a whole lot about flowers. However, getting out of your usual epic vistas and try to photograph something else shows both character and tests your knowledge in the visual arts. Also, it's just super fun and interesting. In my continued exploration of landscape photography locations in Denmark, Sophie and I came by this tulip field in southern Jutland. Tulip fields are mainly known from the Netherlands, but having one close to my home was an opportunity I didn't want to go to waste. In this video I really had to think about my compositional choices, so I'll share my thoughts on composition and approach to photographing in a setting I'm not quite used to. So we've come just outside of Ribe to this beautiful field of tulips. And yeah, I said Ribe, we are not even in the Netherlands, we are still in Denmark. So this is like one of, I don't know, 2 or 3 tulip fields we have in the entire Denmark. But it's very, very beautiful. I found this super cool composition where I have like a single yellow tulip coming out of a bunch of red tulips. I've tried a few different compositions where I really isolate only that one yellow tulip, but I've also tried some where I get a little bit more of the background. So I'm shooting it at f4, my lowest aperture, simply just to get the foreground and background way out of focus and all the focus on this single yellow tulip. So I've zoomed all the way into 200mm just to completely isolate this yellow tulip. I'm going to try both a vertical and a horizontal. I'm not sure exactly which one I prefer. I think I prefer the horizontal, but I'm not entirely sure. So this is just like such a beautiful, beautiful setting. So I'll just walk a bit more around and see whatever else I can find. So I found another place where I have a single yellow tulip among red tulips, and it makes quite a significant difference how far above the ground you are. So even a few centimeters makes a huge difference. So really just try to raise your tripod like 2 centimeters and then another 2 centimeters and then another 2 centimeters just to see how it changes and see what composition works the best. I'm still shooting at f4 just to get a really low depth of field. I think if I had like f2.8 I would probably shoot at that, simply just to get that one single yellow tulip in focus. These photos are brilliant examples of how I always try to find a kind of focal point. What am I taking a photo of? Instead of thinking I'm taking a photo of a tulip field, I take a photo of one tulip in a field of tulips. Even though the surroundings are blurred, there is no doubt about what the scene looks like. There is also a strong interpretational value to a photo where one element stands out from the mass. So right now the sun is also pretty far above the horizon, but as you can see here behind me, this is where the sun shines on the tulips. But if I turn around, you can actually see that the tulips here are still a little bit backlit. So when the sun comes in and it hits the flower leaves, I think, flower petals, then they will get a little bit more light and get backlit, so they shine a little bit more. That is why we are in this side of the field here. You can see there's a lot of rows of tulips all the way through the scene, but just here behind us, that is basically just like the end of the field. So that is why, simply just to have that extra glow on the tulips, it works really well. So there's just so much to photograph in a tulip field, and especially this one I really like it because there are so many different colors of tulips. So you can play with diagonal lines, you can play with straight lines, and right now I have one of those straight line shots. And it's basically just like taking the entire field with all the different colors, so you get all these lines. I'm trying to both make one where I focused on one line at a very low depth of field, f4, and then I'm also putting it on f11 and making a focus stack all the way through the scene. And then I will come home and see which one I prefer. I'm not entirely sure right now. These photos here are actually very atypical to how I usually compose photos with one strong focal point. Here the focus is more on the interaction between the lines of tulips and colors. As you can see, I decided to stick to the shallow depth of field photo. By doing so, the white line serves as the anchor in this almost abstract photo, as these tulips are the brightest part of the photo and they're in focus. I had the same thoughts composing this photo, having the yellow tulips in focus as they would automatically draw the attention. If they were out of focus, it would just confuse the viewer. In this example, we only have a single kind of tulips. In this way, it's the part of the photo that are in focus, which serves as the anchor. I like the color harmony between the green and purples, and having the lines diagonal creates an interest that makes up for the lack of other colors. I have changed to my wide angle. This is actually my Astro lens, the Sigma 20mm 1.4, and I'm shooting at a very low depth of field and I'm going all the way down. See here, so like I'm like literally shooting up into the tulips, and it gives a really cool perspective, and it is really cool that the background is just so much out of focus. So I really like what I'm seeing right now. I'm very curious to see how it will look when I come back at the computer, if everything is just like 2:1 sharp, but I'm trying a few different apertures, everything from 1.4 to 2.8. That should probably cover what I need in regard to depth of field. Using the wide angle lens at an open aperture and getting down low, I not only change the perspective into something unusual and interesting, but I also create a very strong depth. To the viewer, it feels like being Alice in Wonderland walking among these huge tulips. Beside the depth, I also aim to have a strong focal point in these photos. In this photo I have the small yellow tulip standing out and working as the anchor of the photo from where you can explore the other tulips. I did my best to keep the edges clean as to frame the group of tulips. In this one, I instead used the tulips in the near foreground to frame the two main tulips. This is another way to use framing. Either keep the edges clean or fill the edges with elements to frame the center of the photo. Also, having these two tulips in the very near foreground creates a strong sense of depth. This one is just nice, soft and clean. I like how the leaves and flower create a triangle from each lower diagonal, clean, harmonious and simple. This one I love for the strong primary colors. The red and yellow tulip combined with the blue sky. Although not a primary color, the greens are often seen in combination with the primary colors, so it all comes together nicely. The two pinkish white tulips work for balance. Even though it might be a little busy, I really think this photo works great. To me it feels harmonious. In this last example, I had to get all the way down on my back to compose the photograph. The strong contrast between the 3 flowers creating a triangle and the blue sky just works really well here. I also managed to get some separation between the foreground flowers and the out of focus flower in the background. I also tried getting some of the classic shots of the converging rows of tulips, but in the harsh daylight I did not really find them to be that interesting. With rows like that, you'd preferably have them work as a kind of leading element, and as I didn't have them lead to anything of interest, they didn't really work for me. Sophie and I spent a good 4 hours in this tulip field, and as with so many other cool locations, time just flies. It was interesting to focus more on the intimate details than the big epic vistas. Next week's video will be the first from our trip to Gran Canaria. Gran Canaria is not a known landscape photography destination, which just makes it even more fun, and oh boy did I get some photos I'm very happy about. You can look very much forward to that video. I hope you enjoyed this week's video, learned a thing or two about composition, and as always, I'd highly appreciate both a like and a comment.